The light falls strangely here, in the valley they once called the Greasy grass. It is neither dawn nor dusk, but some hushed hour between, when the air trembles with expectation, and the sky itself seems to hold its breath. Pine needles quiver, though no wind stirs. Dust sways in suspended beams of copper light, and every sound feels amplified, sharpened, as though the earth is listening. A horse exhales a plume of white vapor, the crack of ice breaking on its breath, carrying like a brittle shiver across the stillness. The air is dense with the smell of sweat clinging to leather, with the faint iron tang of weapons not yet fired, with smoke drifting from fires guttering low in the camp. And beneath it all, almost imperceptible, there is a vibration in the ground. Thousands of hooves and heartbeats pressing toward inevitability. In this spectral hour, a man rises from the circle of vision. His body bears wounds opened by ritual, 50 scores across his arms where knives had torn and hooks had clung, his blood once dripped to seal a vow that life itself would be offered if it meant his people's survival. The scars are fresh, his muscles taut, his breath ragged from the weight of a prophecy. He had danced until he could no longer stand, until the earth itself seemed to dissolve beneath him, and he saw what no soldier's map could ever capture. Grasshoppers falling upside down, lifeless, their tiny legs twitching in surrender. The meaning was clear, carved into the marrow of his vision. The enemy would fall like insects. The tide of fate was already written. Around him, the camp lay folded in shadow, teepee poles etched against the dim horizon, hides trembling faintly as though the very structures sensed what was approaching. Children slept in tangled blankets, their faces smeared with ash and smoke, while elders whispered prayers over cedar embers, their voices thin as reeds bending in river current. The scent of roasted bison fat mingled with sage burned for protection, creating a strange blend of sustenance and sanctity. Every object seemed heavy with symbolism. The feather tied at the entrance of a lodge, swaying without wind, the drum skins cooling in the night air, the painted shields stacked like silent guardians. Life in this valley had its own rhythm, yet this night was broken from that rhythm. Tonight was a breath before collapse. Beyond the ridges, soldiers rode stiff in their uniforms, their boots polished though already scuffed by mud and stone, their sabers clinking faintly in restless motion. The air around them smelled of oil and powder, of canvas tents carried on muleback, of stale tobacco tucked into worn mouths. Some among them carried whispers of doubt, uneasy after scouts returned with warnings of forces far greater than they had expected. Yet the man they followed, George Armstrong Custer, did not allow hesitation to nest. His gamble was to press forward, to divide his men, to trust in speed and surprise against numbers that no calculation could justify. He looked not upon the valley with reverence, but with the narrowed eyes of ambition, a belief that glory would be carved here, and his name spoken in halls of power far from this wind-swept plain. The contrast between the two worlds was stark, yet intertwined. The sacred dance and the calculated gamble, the smell of sage smoke and the tang of brass cartridges, the sound of drums and the jangle of bridles. One world was fighting for its very breath, for the survival of its children and the preservation of its stories. The other was driven by command, reputation, and the hunger for victory. And as the first light of day bled onto the valley floor, those worlds drew closer until their shadows began to merge. The narrator's gaze lingers on details that often slip from history's grasp. A mother's hand tightening on a small pouch of beads, pressing it to her child's chest. A soldier adjusting the strap of his cartridge box, murmuring the Lord's Prayer under his breath, though his lips tremble with doubt. The frost forming along the edges of a warrior's bowstring, thin crystals catching in the early light like fragile glass. Even the earth seemed caught between choices, blades of grass bending one way, then the other, uncertain where the weight would fall. And yet there is silence. Heavy, oppressive silence. The kind that wraps itself around bone and blood, that presses down until breathing feels like sacrilege. It is the silence of two forces staring into the abyss of one another without yet crossing the line. Silence that knows what will be broken. Silence that tastes like grief before the grief itself has been born. For a fleeting instant, the valley holds its breath as if it could refuse to allow what history demands. The warrior with the vision stands at the edge, his hand brushing against the haft of his spear, his eyes fixed beyond the horizon, where a thin plume of dust betrays the oncoming tide of cavalry. He remembers the grasshoppers, remembers the omen, remembers the voice within that whispered, "They will fall. They will fall." And though the numbers are vast, though death will consume many on both sides, his lips curve in neither smile nor sorrow, but something deeper, resignation to the weave of destiny. Custer, too, presses forward, his hand tightening around the reins, his gaze flickering with a dangerous certainty. Behind him, men follow because they must, because loyalty demands it, because doubt is drowned by the cadence of command. Yet within their ranks are those who feel the valley itself pressing against them, as though the air thickens with unseen resistance. Horses snort uneasily, their ears twitching to sounds only they can hear, the distant drumbeat carried on wind, the whisper of prophecy hanging in grass and soil. The scene narrows once more, to the detail of a single rope binding a bundle of arrows, to the tilt of a lone raven circling above, to the smoke curling from a dying fire at the camp's edge. Each carries its own language, its own symbolism. The rope, bonds of duty, of faith, of inevitable confrontation. The raven, omen of death, messenger of transition. The smoke, memory rising, fragile, dissipating into the unseen. Together, they weave an invisible tapestry that envelops both sides of the coming storm. And as the silence stretches to the breaking point, the valley becomes something more than landscape. It becomes a crucible, a threshold where ambition and prophecy will meet, where blood will write its story into the soil, where ghosts will forever linger in the whisper of grass and the cry of birds. The hidden last stand is not yet begun. Yet already it breathes, already it shapes itself in the minds and marrow of those who stand upon its edge. The chapter closes in this fragile moment, before the first shot, before the first scream, before the first surge of horses. It closes on the valley itself, holding the weight of fate in its silence, as the shadows of men and horses lengthen. The silence is about to shatter, but for now it remains suspended, trembling, sacred. And into that silence we walk, deeper, toward the brutal gamble that will ignite the next passage of this unfolding story. The twilight thickens like smoke over the valley, its edges painted in bruised purples and dying gold. Against the horizon, the poles of the Sundance Lodge rise as if spears driven into the ribs of the earth, their hides flapping faintly in the evening wind. At their base, men and women gather in silence, breath steaming in the cool air, their eyes cast toward the center where sacrifice waits. The earth is dry beneath their feet, cracked and scarred, smelling of dust and cedar, yet tonight it is holy ground, a place where the body is unmade so the spirit may stand taller. The chanting begins low, like thunder rolling through distant canyons, and soon the drumbeat joins, steady, relentless, a heartbeat against the coming dark. The air thickens with sage smoke, bitter on the tongue, curling into braids of gray that drift upward as if carrying prayers to unseen heights. Warriors step into the circle, painted bodies glistening with sweat and ash. Strips of flesh, pierced and fastened with rawhide thongs, tether them to the central pole. With each pull, with each staggering step, their wounds tear wider, crimson rivers running down their arms, yet no cry breaks the rhythm. Their pain is not theirs alone. It is the people's. It is the burden of survival. It is the vow that even flesh can be given if it means the children will see another dawn. Among them moves one who carries a vision heavy as stone. His arms are latticed with cuts, his eyes glazed from hunger and sleepless nights. He dances until his body trembles like a candle in the wind, until the world dissolves into flickering shadows and the veil between realms grows thin. Then it comes, the sight of grasshoppers falling upside down, limp and still. It is not mere dream. It is prophecy. The soldiers will fall, scattered and senseless, their guns silenced like insects in the dust. Around the lodge, women wail softly, their voices weaving with the drum into a lament that is also a vow. Children clutch their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed at the sight of fathers tearing flesh in devotion. The air reeks of blood and sweat, but beneath it lingers something higher, the scent of cedar and sage, the perfume of hope clawed from agony. The ritual binds the people together tighter than any chain of iron, fusing body and spirit in a promise that they will stand as one when the storm comes. Far off, across the rolling ridges, Custer's men ride forward, their laughter strained, their uniforms stiff, their hearts beating to a different drum. They cannot hear the chant that shakes the stars, nor taste the blood-soaked dust beneath moccasined feet. They ride blind into the weave of prophecy, into a circle already closed. The scene fades into silence, the lodge trembling with the last echoes of the drum. A thin wisp of smoke rises toward the indifferent heavens, carrying the vow sealed in flesh and fire. The people wait, the earth waits, the sky waits, for dawn, for hoofbeats, for history's cruel hand. And in that pause, the ritual stills into memory, its weight pressing forward into the valley where the brutal gamble waits to unfold. The valley exhales with a cold breath, as if the earth itself knows what is coming. The tall grasses sway in restless waves, whispering secrets in the dusk, their blades slick with dew that glitters faintly like tears clinging to lashes. Horses paw nervously at the soil, their hooves striking flint chips that scatter like sparks, each sound sharp in the oppressive quiet. The air tastes of iron and damp earth, the scent of leather and waxed cartridge belts, heavy enough to cling to the tongue. Above, a lone hawk shrieks, circling once before vanishing into the bruised clouds, its cry echoing like a warning across the ridges. Custer's men sit uneasy in their saddles, their faces hardened by dust and sleepless nights. Some finger their rifles absent-mindedly, the wood slick from sweat, while others murmur fragments of prayer under their breath. Doubt has already crept among them, whispered by scouts whose reports spoke of a force too vast to number. Yet orders bind them, and ambition drives them. Behind stern expressions are fathers, sons, brothers, who hear the beating of their own hearts louder than the rhythm of hooves beneath them. The silence presses upon them like a weight, and still they ride forward. Across the valley, Lakota and Cheyenne warriors stand in patient readiness, their bodies painted with ochre and ash, their braids laced with feathers that tremble in the faint wind. They whisper in their own tongue, voices carrying prayers to ancestors whose spirits watch from the ridgelines. The smell of sage lingers on their skins, their shields glinting faintly with painted suns and birds of prey. Some close their eyes, listening for the drums carried on the wind, while others lift their faces to the sky, reading the language of clouds and crows. A scout, his face carved with lines of age and worry, moves swiftly between the shadows. His words are quiet but urgent. There are more soldiers than expected, but also more warriors gathered than ever before. His breath steams in the cooling air, his eyes shadowed with knowledge. This valley will not release its witnesses lightly. He carries both the weight of warning and the silence of inevitability. The horses shift, restless. Ears flick, nostrils flare, hooves grind against the stony earth. They sense what men deny, that the ground itself is trembling with the tread of thousands. Somewhere in the stillness, a drum sounds, faint, steady, like the heartbeat of the valley itself. It reverberates against the ribs of every listener, soldier and warrior alike, binding them in a rhythm that neither side can escape. The narrator's gaze lingers on the smallest of details. A strip of cloth tied to a rifle barrel, fluttering faintly as if in surrender. A feather snagged in the grass, bending and bowing but never breaking. The sheen of frost already forming along the string of a warrior's bow. Each detail is a fragment of memory already forming, already writing itself into the soil that will drink so much blood. The silence deepens until it feels like drowning. Men shift in their saddles. Warriors tighten grips on spears, and the valley swallows every sound except the faint sigh of grass and the tremor of the earth. It is the stillness before storm, the pause before prophecy breathes itself into the world. And then, as the outline closes, the valley itself seems to inhale sharply, preparing for the scream of gunfire, for the clash of worlds, for the unraveling of all that stands balanced on this knife's edge of silence. The threshold has been reached, and history waits in that last trembling breath. The silence fractures like glass. A single rifle cracks, sharp as betrayal, and the valley shudders in its echo. Birds erupt from the trees, their wings scattering in frantic arcs across the pale morning sky, leaving behind a hollow stillness that is filled at once with smoke and screams. The first volley has been fired, and with it, the fragile veil of silence is torn forever. The acrid stench of gunpowder swells, burning throats and stinging eyes. Smoke curls low across the grass, twisting into gray veils that blur the line between earth and sky. Soldiers fall where they stand, their bodies folding into the soil as if claimed by the very ground they had sought to command. A man clutches at his chest, fingers slick with blood, his gaze frozen mid-prayer. Another collapses without a sound, his rifle still locked in rigid grip, the bayonet jutting skyward like a broken cross. Warriors surge forward with cries that split the air like thunder. Their voices carry generations of defiance, the sound rising above the din of gunfire like a storm chant. Painted faces gleam through the haze, fierce with resolve, and their arrows arc in dark rain, finding gaps in blue wool coats, striking flesh with dreadful precision. The drums that had beaten faintly in the distance now thunder in the marrow, each strike echoing through the chaos like a heartbeat, urging them onward. The valley itself becomes an arena of smoke and fire. Horses scream, their flanks lathered with foam, their eyes rolling white with terror. The ground is churned into mud and blood, grass flattened beneath bodies and hooves. A kettle topples from a burning fire, its contents spilling, the smell of scorched meat mixing grotesquely with the scent of charred powder and sweat. Fragments of daily life, dropped beads, torn moccasins, the splintered shaft of a rifle butt, litter the ground as if the world itself is unraveling. Among the warriors, one kneels briefly beside a fallen soldier. He touches the warm scalp with trembling fingers, then lifts his hand to his face, neither gloating nor triumphant, but solemn, as if acknowledging the enormity of the act. The gesture is a prayer more than a conquest, a reminder that every death weighs heavily, even in victory. His bow still drips with rain and blood, the wood darkened, the string fraying in the cold air. Custer's men fight in fragments, their lines broken, their signals swallowed by the roar of battle. They fire blindly into the smoke, their bullets whistling past unseen targets, the sound like wasps tearing through the grass. Orders are shouted but dissolve in the cacophony, drowned beneath the screams of the dying and the pounding of hooves. In their eyes flickers a dawning horror, the recognition that the gamble has collapsed, that the enemy is not a scattering force, but a tide that cannot be stemmed. Through the haze, a soldier drops to his knees, pressing a small silver cross to his lips before falling forward into the mud. A warrior nearby raises a shield painted with the sun, its surface cracked by bullets, yet it catches the faint light through the smoke, glowing like fire in the fog. These moments collide, faith against faith, ritual against ambition, until they merge into one great storm of grief and defiance. The battlefield grows darker, though the sun still climbs. Smoke thickens until it clings like a suffocating shroud. The cries of men are muffled, distant, as though already buried beneath the soil. The wind carries sparks from burning grass, tiny embers swirling upward only to vanish into gray oblivion. The valley has become a crucible, forging memory out of horror, shaping a story that will echo long after the screams have faded. And then, amid the ruin, a rifle shatters against stone, its bayonet broken, its stock splintered. Half buried in the churned earth, it juts upward like a crucifix marking a mass grave. The smoke coils around it, and for a moment, all sound falls away. The broken weapon becomes a symbol, not of power, but of collapse, of a gamble lost, of faith betrayed by steel and ambition. The outline closes with this image, the shattered bayonet, the smoke curling like incense around it, the valley holding its breath once more. But the silence now is different. It is not anticipation. It is mourning, heavy and inexorable, a silence that signals the deeper unraveling still to come. The smoke clears in tatters, drifting like torn veils across the ravaged grass. Amid the silence that follows, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the groans of the wounded, a single figure remains standing. Not man, but beast. A pinto horse, its hide mottled black and white, trembles in the hush. Its flanks are streaked with dried blood, not its own, its mane tangled with ash and sweat. The empty saddle creaks as the leather contracts in the cooling air, stirrups swinging idly like pendulums measuring the weight of death. This is Comanche. No rider guides him now, no bugle calls him forward. He stands alone, chest heaving, nostrils flaring in shallow bursts, a monument to survival amid annihilation. Around him, the earth is littered with the broken. The bodies of cavalrymen twisted in unnatural repose, blue coats stained with mud and gore, rifles fallen from lifeless hands. The smell of blood is heavy in the air, mingling with gunpowder and the faint sweetness of crushed sage beneath trampling hooves. The warriors gather in the aftermath, their voices low, reverent, as they take in the strange sight of this creature who endured while others fell. Some approach slowly, extending a hand to his sweat-darkened flank, feeling the trembling life beneath skin slick as river stone. There is no mockery, no gloating, only solemn recognition. For in this animal, they see a story written differently, one spared from the tally of the dead, one who will carry the memory of this valley long after human voices fall silent. The battlefield is littered with remnants of living and dying. A bent lance lies across a soldier's outstretched arm. A rosary dangles from the pocket of a man whose lips are still parted as though in prayer. A child's doll, dropped in the chaos of the camp, rests in the trampled mud, its painted face cracked and smeared. And through it all, Comanche stands unmoving, as though carved in stone, a sentinel to grief. His eyes, wide and glassy, reflect not victory but exhaustion, the haunted look of one who has seen too much. The warriors who survived walk past him, their painted shields streaked with blood, their faces taut with sorrow as much as triumph. They understand the cost of this day. They understand that though the soldiers are gone, the echo of their coming will not vanish with the smoke. In that quiet, Comanche becomes more than a horse. He is a living grave marker, the final witness to a gamble played and lost, the embodiment of survival against the tide of death. His hooves, sunk deep in churned soil, press into earth that will never forget. His shadow stretches long across the valley, merging with those who lie fallen, binding him into the memory of this last stand. The outline closes with a slow pull away. Comanche standing solitary in the field of graves, the sky bruised with evening light, the wind tugging at his mane as though trying to carry his story away. Yet he remains, rooted, silent, sacred, the lone survivor, the ghost of a cavalry undone. The river waits like a black mirror, its current sluggish under the weight of smoke drifting from the valley above. Then, through the haze, comes the groan of iron and the mournful whistle of steam. The far west emerges at the bend like a ghost, its paddle wheel turning with weary rhythm, each creak of wood echoing the broken bodies it has come to bear. Soot belches from its smokestack, streaking the pale sky with grief, as though the heavens themselves must wear mourning veils. On the banks, the wounded are gathered in silence, broken only by ragged breath and muffled sobs. Their faces are ashen, eyes glassy with pain, uniforms soaked through with sweat and blood. Some are carried on stretchers cobbled from tent poles and torn blankets. Others limp with arms slung over comrades' shoulders. The air is thick with the copper tang of wounds, the sour stench of vomit, the faint sweetness of coffee brewed hastily on the deck above. The cries of the injured mix with the hollow clang of chains as gangplanks are lowered, and for a moment the battlefield seems to bleed directly into the belly of the waiting vessel. Inside, the decks creak under the weight of despair. Lantern light flickers against blood-stained planks, where surgeons bend over bodies with trembling hands, knives flashing in the dim glow, sawdust scattered across the floor to soak up what spills. The air reeks of boiled rags and whiskey poured as antiseptic, of sweat and fear and the sharp bite of carbolic. Men moan, some whispering half-formed prayers, others calling out for mothers who will never hear. A young soldier clutches a letter stained in his own blood, pressing it to his lips as though it might deliver him home. At the helm, a reporter watches with fevered eyes, scribbling furiously in a notebook, though his hands shake too badly to form steady lines. He searches for words heavy enough to carry the enormity of what he sees, yet every phrase feels too thin, too pale against the tide of suffering unfolding around him. Outside, the paddle wheel churns on, indifferent, its rhythmic slap against the river echoing like a drumbeat in a funeral march. The river accepts it all without protest. Its surface ripples as bodies are shifted, as cries spill out into the open air, as memory itself is ferried downstream. The far west is no longer merely a vessel of wood and iron. It has become a floating sepulcher, a dark hymn sliding slowly toward distant towns where news of disaster will strike harder than any bullet. One man, his arm bandaged in a sling, takes a knife to the wooden rail of the deck. Slowly, carefully, he carves names into the charred surface. Comrades, commanders, friends, all etched letter by trembling letter, as though the act of remembering could hold them back from the abyss. Each stroke of the blade is a prayer, each curl of shavings a silent offering to those swallowed by the earth. As the far west pushes into the current, steam trailing in a long white ribbon across the water, the valley behind grows faint, swallowed by smoke and distance. Yet the echoes remain. The crack of rifles, the thunder of hooves, the cries of the dying, carried in the hearts of the survivors and in the very timbers of the ship. The boat drifts onward, heavy with its cargo of grief, into a wider story of exile, mourning, and reckoning still to come. The outline closes with the image of the river itself, dark, endless, carrying the vessel forward. Its waters bear not just bodies, but memory, whispering that history has not ended here. It only changes form, moving inexorably into the lives it will haunt next. The valley lies in ruin, the air brittle with winter's edge. Frost webs the corners of abandoned lodges, each pole leaning like a weary sentinel, each hide stiff and darkened with soot. The fires have long since burned down, but their ghosts remain, curls of ash rising in the wind, the bitter scent of charred sage and cedar lingering as though the prayers whispered over them still cling to the earth. Silence spreads across the plain, heavy and absolute, broken only by the groan of timbers, where tents have collapsed into themselves, like ribs folding over a hollow chest. At the margins of this shattered place, women gather. They kneel where the grass is flattened by bodies now removed, their breaths visible in the cold, white ribbons of sorrow. Their hands move slowly, reverently, brushing over broken rifle stocks, bent arrowheads, fragments of blue wool coats half buried in the mud. One lifts a brass button and presses it to her lips, not in triumph, but in mourning. For the blood shed here, no matter the side, has stained more than the soil. Another binds sinew into rope, her fingers stiff but determined, weaving strength out of what is left behind. Nearby, a child clutches a scrap of painted leather, tracing its cracked surface with a trembling finger as though it were a relic of something sacred. The valley still echoes, not with voices, but with memory. The ridge where the last stand broke remains etched with ghostly impressions, hoofprints frozen in frost, darker stains that no weather will wash away. To walk here is to hear the battle replayed in silence, the thunder of hooves felt beneath the skin, the cries of men woven into the cry of the wind, the smoke still rising though no fire remains. The place itself has become a grave, not of bodies alone, but of certainties, of ambitions, of lives thrust into the crucible of fate. A warrior steps forward, his breath shallow in the frigid air, his face drawn with the weight of what must be spoken. He raises his hand and begins to name them: the dead, the fallen, the families now burdened with absence. Each name is released into the valley like a stone cast into water, rippling outward, joining with those spoken before. The sound is neither chant nor shout, but something older, more solemn, the tolling of memory itself. His voice falters only once when he names a brother, but he continues, for to stop would be to break the bond between living and dead. The women answer with low voices, repeating fragments of prayer in rhythm with the names. Together they weave a lament, their tones rising and falling like the bells of a distant cathedral. In the hush that follows, the wind takes up their song, carrying it across the ridges where smoke once billowed, over the river where the wounded were ferried away, and into the vast silence that stretches beyond. The sun dips low, staining the sky in lavender and bruised crimson. Shadows lengthen across the valley, merging with the scars of battle until it seems the land itself wears mourning robes. A lone candle flickers in the ruins of a lodge, its flame small, uncertain, but alive. It trembles in the draft, a fragile heartbeat against the encroaching dark. Yet it endures, refusing to die, holding the valley's silence in its glow. As night closes in, the valley settles into its new role. It is no longer just a place of grass and river, but a shrine carved by blood and silence, where every stone and every gust of wind carries the weight of remembrance. Those who leave it behind will carry its memory in their bones, and those who return will bow their heads, for they know this ground is consecrated by sacrifice. The outline closes on that single candle, guttering but unextinguished, its light bending against the dark. The valley breathes in silence, holding its story for the generations yet to come, a place forever marked by the echoes of the last stand.